The year is 1521. The Spanish are colonizing everywhere. They are winning against the Aztecs in the Americas, and the Magellan expedition had just reached the Philippines. Magellan, being as patriotic as ever, claimed the land for Spain, though being Portuguese himself, named the islands after King Philip II of Spain, and converted some of the locals to Christians. Only a month after reaching the Philippines, Magellan was killed. This did not hinder the Spanish by a long shot. More Spanish expeditions came to the Philippines, but most of them did basically nothing, except for Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. He was different, befriending local tribe leaders, which I imagine going something like this. Hey, we're here to take over your society and realistically only use it to trade with other countries. Yeah, we don't speak your language. Damn, I just realized you don't speak the same language as us. OMG, you guys come in peace. Wish we knew that before we killed a bunch of you guys. He also named the settlement Town of the Most Holy Name of Jesus. No, this is not a joke, but it did become modern-day Cebu. He also teamed up with some natives to attack Manila and establish it as the capital for the Spanish East Indies. Yeah, there's the thing with the Y in Manila. I don't know where it went, and there's no clear... Anyways. As time moved on, the Spanish used the Philippines as a sort of proxy to do some invading to nearby places like Taiwan, and more people got converted to Christianity. A cathedral was built in Manila with an Episcopalian palace, Augustine, Dominican, and Franciscan monasteries, and a Jesuit house. In order to protect the Philippines, the Spaniards built a franchise of forts called Presidios, which is secured by both Latin Americans and Filipinos. It was mainly used to protect the archipelago from foreign invaders like the Portuguese, British, Dutch, Spanish pirates, and Muslims. We all know the Spanish love Muslims for conquista. Due to the nature of the archipelago and the low population, it was extremely easy for the Spanish to colonize it, but it was mostly beneficial for the Philippines. They introduced a lot of Western things like the Code of Law, the Gregorian calendar, and new foods like pineapples and chocolates. Also, education. Hey, I noticed you guys are pretty dumb, so it's time for school. No! Wait, this is actually really good for us. Educating people was the leading factor for the modernizing change in the Philippines. Some of the oldest schools in the first educational system in Asia was introduced by the Spanish. In fact, when the US decided to stop being at war with themselves and be at war with other people, the Philippines was one of the most educated in Asia. During the 18th century, the Philippines derived most of its income from pork trading with other countries. The Spanish knew that it wouldn't be a profitable country during their war against the Dutch, Muslims, and fighting off Japanese pirates, nearly bankrupted the colonial treasury. The repeated wars, lack of wages, and near starvation were so intense, almost half the soldiers sent either died or fled to the countryside to live as vagabonds among the rebellious natives or escaped enslaved Indians, where they mixed race through ways that rhyme with grape and restitution, which blurred the racial chase system the Spanish tried so hard to maintain. This increased the difficulty of maintaining the Philippine government drastically. The royal fiscal of Manila even wrote a letter to the King of Spain, in which he advises to abandon the colony, but the religious orders were against this since they considered the Philippines to be a launching pad for the conversion of the Far East, because, forethought matters. The Philippines mostly survived on money from Spain for this relatively short period. Also, real quick, the British invaded and took over Manila in late 1762. They tried to take over more land, but Spanish/Filipino/Indian soldiers from the racial blurring earlier kept them in check. The British were so powerless to do things by themselves, they supported several Filipino revolts, but to no avail. But their occupation ended in 1764 as with terms of the 7 Years' War Peace Treaty. Sometime in the next century, Queen Isabel II of Spain opened the first free public school system that used Spanish as their base language, which led to an increased number of educated Filipinos. Additionally, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 cut travel time to Spain short, which facilitated the rise of the Ilustrados, an enlightened class of Spanish Filipinos that had been able to enroll in Spanish and European universities. A lot of governmental changes were underwent as well, improving the economy and the standard of living, ahead of most Asian countries and some European countries at the time. Overseas, Filipinos were involved in several anti-colonial revolutions. For example, the Taiping Rebellion in China. Frederick Townsend Ward had a militia employing foreigners to put an end to the rebellion for the Qing government. At first, he hired American and European adventurers, but they proved to be unruly. While recruiting for better troops, he met his commander-in-chief, Vicente Maquinana, who was part of the larger Filipino population then living in Shanghai. The overseas Filipinos having a more active role in revolutions caused the Philippines to keep up with the trend and start having revolutions, though the Spanish mostly suppressed these. The revolutionary seed only really started to grow in 1872 after 3 Filipino priests were accused of inciting revolutionary thoughts and were executed. Also because of all the foreigners immigrating to the Philippines, the racial lines have been blurred and the term Filipino now meant anyone born in the Philippines. Hooray for definition correctness. But the Philippine Revolution didn't really begin until 1896. Jose Rizal, a really well-educated guy that inspired a lot of the independence movements. He is considered a national hero, but he got executed for treason. Enter Emilio Aguinaldo, basically acting as the elected leader of the revolution. He and other revolutionaries did fight the good fight until he agreed to the Pact of Buak-Nambato, which caused him to be exiled. The US invited Aguinaldo back in hopes that he would inspire the rest of the Philippines to rebel against the Spanish, and they succeeded. Aguinaldo declared the independence of the Philippines. Just a few days later, he proclaimed the revolutionary government of the Philippines, which seems kind of redundant because if you're independent already, you wouldn't be having a revolution, and it wouldn't be revolutionary, but whatever, it's history. By the time the US came, the Filipinos had already taken control of the entire island of Luzon, except for the walled-in city of Intramuros, which is inside Manila. The Philippines and the US joined forces for the last time in the Battle of Manila. The US captured Manila and prevented the Filipino forces from entering it. Additionally, the US would not formally provide a statement of their support in the revolution. In the end of the very short Spanish-American War, they signed the Treaty of Paris, in which Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines were ceded to the US in exchange for $20 million. A month after the treaty was signed, the first Philippine Republic was proclaimed under Asia's first democratic constitution, with Aguinaldo as its president, but it is not recognized by the family of nation. On a positive note, the Philippine Revolutionary Army was known to be racially tolerant and accepting, setting itself apart from, well, others. This all led to the Philippine-American War, which led to the death of thousands of Filipino and American soldiers, and a defeat for the First Philippine Republic, and the establishment of the insular government. But laws were passed that set up the fundamentals of a new government, including a judicial system, civil service, and local government. This new government didn't really do much other than make the trade economy move along faster, as did the preceding government, the Commonwealth. But it was during the Great Depression for America, so the eventual Philippine re-takeover would be much easier. During World War II, the Japanese invaded. They occupied the Philippines from 1942 until they were defeated by the Allies in 1945, which as you'd expect was met by a lot of resistance. Among the war crimes committed by Japan are the Bataan Death March and the Manila Massacre, and if you're any familiar of what Japanese did during the war, you would know the kind of atrocities that were committed. After the war, it was found out that over 1 million Filipinos were killed. Although all of this happened, the Philippines became one of the founding members of the United Nations and was finally recognized as an independent nation by the US. The Americans' return to the Philippines was welcomed, probably because of their rehabilitation program and $2 billion that were used to restore the country. After the war, the Philippines began to prosper, until the Marcos era. Ferdinand Marcos was in office from 1965 to 1986. His period was characterized by political repression, censorship, and human rights violation. It was not until the People Power Revolution that Marcos's reign was over. Unfortunately, I don't have time to elaborate on the matter. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about Filipino history. And if you had time, could you please fill out the form? It will give me feedback and will help me out a lot on my personal project. Okay, bye.